Welcome to Fahrenheit 140.
Why 140? It's the temperature that water burns after 6 seconds. I'm Robert Mace.
And I'm Carrie Thompson, and we're the Fahrenheit 140 co hosts covering the news you need to know about climate change in Texas.
Hello, everybody. What we've got going on today is, we'll talk about some articles that we've seen. And then we have Dr. Soe Myint. I'm actually the Meadows chair professor over in the Department of Geography and Environmental Studies here at Texas State University. He's affiliated with us at the Meadows Center, and he's doing a lot of interesting work on, I guess, the tension between water conservation and addressing urban heat island effects. So do you water the trees? Or do you not water the trees? So we're going to hear from him about tree canopies and balancing our tree canopies with water conservation.
I'm going to put my money on watering the trees. What do you think, Robert?
I think so too. Yeah, I think the balance works out. We want to have trees.
Our trees have been pretty happy these last few weeks. How do you think that we're doing on our lakes and springs right now, Robert?
I just got back from vacation, so I haven't taken a look, but
Oh no.
I saw on Facebook one of my friends posted Lake Travis, which is up, but it's still way down. So,
Is it still?
it's not over, but I did see that some of our rivers, hill country rivers, were roaring pretty good. The springs in Bracketville, Las Moras Springs, have now come back. Definitely nice to see.
You called it. You said we were going to have a mild summer.
I guess I wouldn't have expected such a wet July and not from tropical systems. So, we'll take it. So did you come with an article, Carrie?
I did. So I thought this was fun. It comes from USA Today and it's under their moving section. So they're telling people where to move based on climate resiliency. It's a 2024 study, so brand new, done by their own research team. Basically, they're highlighting that they took a look at the top 100 cities roughly, and tried to think about resiliency to climate change. They pointed out that most cities are vulnerable because of either too much, too little water, and too much heat. They used a FEMA index, and then they also used coastal riverine flooding, drought, a chance of severe weather, number of energy tax and financial incentives for residents. They kind of framed it up as saying cities are putting the burden of resiliency on the homeowners themselves. And then they included projected water stress levels and tree equity, which is going to tie really nicely into what we're going to hear from Dr. Myint. Tree equity being the availability of a tree canopy, especially in marginalized communities who are vulnerable to extreme heat. You want to take a guess at which Texas city was at the top of the list? Laredo.
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 Wow. Said it that way.
Yeah, they were highlighted as having some of the lowest FEMA risk indexes. Laredo's number 15 and Austin's all the way down at number 47.
Wow.
So that's the next city under Laredo.
Okay.
What do you have? What'd you find?
So as I mentioned, I just got back from vacation and my wife and I went mostly to Switzerland. We paid extra for our tickets to offset the carbon of our flights. And we found ourselves, we were mostly looking at brutalist churches, but we actually kind of getting from one brutalist church to another wound up going over the mountain ranges. And there's an old stone hotel there. And its business model was pulling people in from the cities to look at the glacier next door. And that glacier is retreated a scary amount. It's still there.
No.
There's quite a bit of meltwater coming off of it. So I found this article at swissinfo.ch, basically talking about the melting glaciers and alpine glaciers. So they noted that, since 1850, the volume of alpine glaciers, basically mountain glaciers, has decreased about 60%, but the giants are shrinking faster. Swiss glaciers lost half their volume between 1931 and 2016, and a further 12% between 2016 and 2021. And that the melting in the past 2 years basically was equivalent to what was lost between 1960 and 1990. Kind of an indication of the rate of melting that correlates directly to the the rate of the temperature increase. Also noted that Switzerland is warming at about twice the rate of the global average. Texas is
Wow.
about equal to the global average in terms of how much we've warmed up. They're about twice that. Another interesting thing this article says that I'll end on is like not all mountain glaciers respond the same, and that there are some in Central Asia that don't seem to be suffering from global warming. And in fact, have some of them have even grown. And so Swiss
Mm.
scientists are studying those glaciers to see, what they might learn from that phenomena and maybe how that might help preserve alpine glaciers there and elsewhere in the world.
Yeah, they're going to need to also send James Bond to whatever new location makes
Yes, they
sense,
probably
right?
do. Dun,
Yeah.
dun, dun, dun.
My next article is about the Switzerland of the West, El Paso. So this one is from Texas Monthly, and it's called El Paso reuses every drop of water it can. The rest of Texas could heed the lesson. So it's highlighting the number of approaches that El Paso is taking to diversify its water supply. They only get 9 inches of rain every year. And, it says statewide we get about 27 inches, just for comparison. They used to almost fully rely on groundwater. They've cut that down to about half or so of their water use. They pull water from the Rio Grande, but they are also now using the largest inland desalination plant in the world. And they're creating enough potable water every day for 200,000 people using brackish groundwater. So, brackish groundwater is water that's salty or really heavy in minerals and not drinkable. So, they're finding a way to use that water and make it potable. And then on top of that, they're treating that water again, and they're moving by 2027. They will be a toilet to tap town. So, meaning that they're going to take their water after it's been used and run through the treatment plant and really fully recycle that and use it for drinking water. So, they've been engaged in an education campaign to deal with the ooh factor. They said, they've made the financial case and people are bought in. And the closing quote was, water is too precious and too rare of a resource in the desert to only use it one time. They do bank water underground, like a lot of like San Antonio and some other
Mhm.
communities do here.
And that water they bank is treated wastewater. They've been doing that since the 80s. They do a lot of cool stuff, and that's going to be an amazing project. Direct potable reuse, I guess, is the versus toilet to tap. But people will call it toilet to tap, but all water is recycled. It's
Yeah,
all
that's right. That's
some way,
right.
shape, or form. So
Yeah. Yeah,
yeah,
inspiring.
I'm looking forward to that project. El Paso Water Utilities does a really good job. And then El Pasoans, when they first were considering doing that, they did a survey with no education, and there was, I want to say, something north of 80%, maybe even 90% approval
It's
out
incredible.
the
Yeah,
block. So
they've really been setting the standard for a long time.
they have been. So my second article is about the Hunga Tonga volcano eruption. I'm sure you've seen, Carrie, that there's been, these articles about over the last few years where we're busting records almost on a daily basis of the highest temperatures we've ever seen. And
Yeah.
of course, that is the trajectory that we're on, but the rate seems to be accelerating. The climate scientists have been speculating on, well, why is that? One reason is we transition from El Nino to neutral conditions, and that dumped a lot of heat into the atmosphere. New requirements on pollution from ocean faring trips for ships reduce particulate pollution from their burning of fossil fuels.
Mm,
And that's a good thing, right? Less air pollution,
right.
but it does actually cause the climate to warm more because those particulates actually provide a cooling function. And the third thing was this Hunga Tonga volcano, which was like generally volcanoes are associated with cooling the climate. But
Okay.
because Hunga Tonga was subaqueous, so it was underneath the ocean, and it blew an ungodly amount of water vapor into the stratosphere. The thought was that was also a factor. Well, paper just came out that involves Andrew Dessler from Texas A&M, actually reading his book. They just published a study kind of looking at the effects of this volcanic eruption, which happened 2 years ago, and basically found that actually it's had no impact on the
Oh,
climate, and maybe, if anything, a slight cooling impact. It increased the stratospheric water contact by 10%, which is pretty substantial, but it also threw a bunch of other particulates and aerosols, and the aerosols tend to cool. So there's
Oh.
probably a canceling out of the two, maybe a little bit of a favoring on the aerosol, the cooling aerosols. So,
So something about the particulates is a cooling factor.
yeah, the particulates provide a cooling function. I'll
Where is
stop.
Honga Tonga volcano?
It's in Polynesia somewhere. So, but I couldn't point it out on a map. But fortunately, this is like radio, so it doesn't matter.
I'm going to point to it on the map right now for everyone.
All right.
Thank you for that. That is interesting.
All right. Well, thank you for those articles. And
Thank you for your articles.
yes, next up, we've got Dr. Myint. Well, welcome back, everybody. We are very pleased to have Dr. Myint with us. Dr. Myint is the Meadows Endowed Chair and Professor at Texas State University with the Department of Geography and Environmental Studies, and came to Texas after 10 years at Arizona State. He has a Bachelor's of Science in Forestry, a Master's of Science in Natural Resources, and a PhD in Natural Resource Management, Forest Survey, and Mapping Science. He's author of a recent article, An Innovative Scheme to Confront the Trade-Off Between Water Conservation and Heat Alleviation with Environmental Justice for Urban Sustainability, the Case of Phoenix, Arizona. He's currently working on a 3-year research project funded by NASA to promote climate resilience in 8 Southeast Asian countries. And he's here with us today to talk about climate mitigation and resilience and environmental justice. So thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you for the introduction, Robert.
We were speaking a little earlier about what an important topic, the balance, the tension between water conservation and tree canopy.
Yeah.
What got you into that?
I feel that the biggest threat nowadays to the planet, our societies and communities, or in general human beings, is climate change and climate extremes. And as we all know, nowadays, all surface temperatures and air temperatures are increasing everywhere. Drought is expanding. Drought intensities are also, increasing over time. And ground and surface water, they're also basically declining everywhere. And so all these issues basically create lots of problems to us. And heat is the number one killer among all climate-related hazards. And so related to those heat extremes, there are lots of issues and problems, and it's also related to air pollution. So because of that, number one killer, there are lots of people who are suffering from cardiovascular diseases and asthma and bronchitis, heat collapse and heat strokes and lung cancers and all kinds of issues. And so, those issues, I believe, are the biggest threat. On the other hand, as you mentioned, water conservation is a key because drought is everywhere, and our ground and surface waters are declining everywhere in the world, not only in the United States, not only in Texas. How do we balance or tackle this trade-off between water conservation and fighting against heat? That's basically, drives me to explore, why is this really a critical issue? And one of the biggest problems that are also linked to so many things in the world, everywhere in the world, populations are ever increasing. That basically attribute and contribute to increased pattern of air pollution and heat. I'm just thinking, how do we handle in the near future of all these feeding ever increasing population everywhere in the whole world? And drought is increasing, ground and surface water are declining, and heat is increasing. So that makes me interested.
You talked about population growth and people are moving into urban areas. Could you talk a little bit about the heat island effect and what that means and how these urban settings are involved?
Heat island is urban areas are basically covered with engineered materials. Some people basically refer to as man-made features. Those materials include metals and shingles and woods and asphalt and cements, and all these materials basically elevate the heat. So normally urban areas are warmer than the surrounding rural environment. And in the plain language, if we take the mean temperatures within the city in comparison to the rural environment around the city, and mean temperature of the city is always higher than the mean temperature of the surrounding rural environment. That could be shrubs or secondary forests or degraded forests or dense forests or whatever. So that's basically demonstrates the heat island effect.
So what do trees do besides just standing there looking green or getting in the way of speeding cars? What's the benefit of trees?
Benefits of trees. Yeah. Well, I love trees a lot. Trees basically function as, carbon sink. And so carbon sequestration, so basically removing carbons from the surrounding atmosphere, use the carbon to make their own food and release oxygen into the atmosphere. But for us as the human beings, we take the oxygen and release carbon into the atmosphere. Trees are doing the other way around, taking the carbon into their system to make foods and release oxygen. At the same time, trees basically mitigate urban heat island or heat extreme. And trees also minimize the effect of air pollution, serve as a buffer to minimize urban stormwater pollution as well. Trees basically prevent from soil erosion and landslides and floods as well. Trees also regulate the hydrological cycle and also control ground and surface water. The other thing is the water quality is better if we have more trees.
How do they help on the heat island effect?
In terms of the function, trees have evapotranspiration. The surrounding air temperatures are getting cooler because of this function, transpiration. At the same time, trees provide shades. In general, everything under trees is basically cooler than the surrounding environment, which basically receive direct sunlight. And so everywhere under the trees is cooler. So, we normally just move automatically to that direction and walk under the tree. You don't need to tell your friends who are walking together with you hey, let's go under the trees.
I call it the conservation of shade. It's like the shortest distance between 2 points in Texas. I'm sure it's true in Arizona. It's not the shortest point, it's the shortest point with shade.
Yeah, that is basically true. And walking under the sun is even almost impossible with the temperature 115 or 120. Cities like Las Vegas and Phoenix is unbearable. Europe is like really, chilly cold with ice and snow. And even in that kind of climate condition, many people pass away. The most vulnerable society or people or neighborhoods with lower income family members or people under poverty level, they died. A lot of people died in Europe due to heat island effect or heat extremes. Heat extremes over there is not really comparable to Las Vegas or Phoenix, but because of whatever the social economic conditions, or they're not getting used to it, or their body does not function as the way they function in temperate country, and when the temperature is about 90 degrees, they pass away. Many people pass away in Europe.
A lot of them don't have air conditioning.
That is a key thing, when we think about climate change or climate extremes, sometimes it's not direct effects. Like recent hurricane hit Texas, and many people died because of when hurricane hit, millions of people without power, and there is no air condition, and that heat extreme basically killed them. Heat alone killed many people per year, but it is not directly from the heat. It could be related to, temperate regions, they don't have air condition, or hurricane hit the area and power got lost.
You mentioned socioeconomic factors. Your recent paper talks about there being some disparities on who has that walk in the shade available to them. Can you talk a little bit about environmental justice and heat island?
We found out that climate change has created more issues in terms of the environmental inequalities. That is basically the low income earners, or people, the homes that property values are lower, per capita income is lower, or medium household income is lower, or people under poverty level are statistically significantly related to these heat issues, that we need to pay serious attention to this. It is not just solving problems for mitigating heat or pollution or drought. We need to help these socially or economically stressed neighborhoods or communities. If we can help them fix these issues, we're basically helping the entire city, not just these groups. When we try to green up those areas or help them, because normally these poor neighborhoods do not have trees and grass and shrubs. Poor neighborhoods have small little houses, very congested, close to each other, no single trees, no single shrubs, no grass at all of them very close to each other. These population, these underserved neighborhoods needs to be paid attention to, and then help them. How do we green up those areas, the opportunities or resources that they need? Normally, they don't grow trees and grass and shrubs because watering plants is too expensive. Running air condition the whole day is also too expensive for them. And they will tell their family members, do not turn on the AC in the afternoon. Those kinds of things, their internal organs, they don't die right away, but their health will be deteriorated over time. The other thing we found is that environmental inequalities are more critical in drier and hotter regions than cold and temperate regions. So people live in warmer areas or drought-prone regions or tropical climate areas. The environmental inequalities are getting higher, a lot higher than those in the cold and temperate regions. The differences in water availability or water use has increased among those race and ethnicity, especially again in hot and drier region. In other words, the water issues are also associated with these race and ethnicity kind of thing.
Was there anything you were not expecting?
Not only the poor neighborhoods or those houses with the lower income or low property values neighborhoods, but also different race and ethnicities are associated with these environmental inequalities. And I didn't know that, those drier areas and hotter areas have more problems with regards to those issues. Not only that, socioeconomically stressed neighborhoods, but also race and ethnicities are also strongly correlated, which are statistically significant.
So what are you working on these days?
I'm working on a research project that you mentioned, a NASA project. Mm-hmm. This particular research focused on 19 cities in 8 Southeast Asian countries. We have been trying to examine how urbanization, again, and then climate change have an impact on biophysical environment along the transect or the buffer zone around each and every cities of all 19 cities at different level of scales. Some cities are mega cities, some are large cities, some are medium-sized city, and then we call smaller cities. So there are 4 different levels of cities, and we would like to see from the city center all the way to the outskirts of the city, how we call it urban-rural continuum, how the urban heat island or vegetation structures stands out in space, like the pattern of those heats and vegetation features of that 19 cities. So we explore different cities and then comparing which has a bigger impact.
What advice do you have for Texas?
Yeah, that's a great question. I see, these emerging issues or unavoidable urgent kind of items in Austin, San Antonio corridor region, one of the fastest growing regions in the United States. And so we can imagine urban heat island or heat extremes or air pollution or flood problems or, water quality, ground and surface water declines or things like that. Plus, of course, there are also many other social, economic related items. More air conditions will be used. That will basically release a lot of carbon into the atmosphere. Greenhouse gases were released into the atmosphere by air conditions and heaters that people use. and all kinds of things. I think we need to basically take care of it by some kind of urban greening, and we need to act really quick. We can't afford to delay for this type of region. If we plan now and start taking action at a full speed and without delay, then only it may be good next 10 years later or something like that, because all these things are all interconnected. Drought condition is getting higher, underground water is getting less, surface water is getting less. When heat and air pollution is happening, there are also some kind of mental disease. Social interactions are getting worse and worse. And that kind of stress, especially for those under socioeconomically stressed regions, they are suffering the most. We need to do climate resilience planning at full speed. We can't afford to delay for this region. We need to start as quickly as possible, kind of thing. I have heard that, economists, like, those business people saying that spend money to get money. In my case, we need to use water to increase vegetated features that can basically help conserve the water. So my motto is like, when we increase trees and grass and shrubs or woody plants, we save water, or we may even increase water. Using water is not really a complete loss. There are many different ways. We can use drought-tolerant species. We can use less water-consuming species. We can use local tree species that doesn't require water. We can do it in many different ways. So use water to save water might be something.
I like that. What do you think?
Yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you for your work, Dr. Myint.
Thank you so much.
Well, that was fantastic, Robert. I'm so glad Dr. Myint could join us.
Yeah, it was great.
Spend water to get water.
Use water to save water.
Use water to save water. If you want to learn more about Dr. Myint's published research or about him in general, links in the show notes. And then, of course, as he's one of the endowed chairs of the Meadows Center, you can also learn more about him on our website.
Cool.
So let's share a little good news. Robert, did you bring us some good news today?
I did. I found an interview. It's from The Atlantic, and it's related to Texas last year becoming the leader in the United States in generating solar power, or has more than 18,000 megawatts of solar power capacity installed on its grid. And California has just over 17,000. So Texas has more than California. Yeah.
Yeah, take that, California.
Go Texas. They also noted that in 2022, Texas generated more than 130,000 gigawatt hours of wind and solar electricity. The next best state was California with less than 53,000.
Wow.
Which is also pretty amazing. One big gist of the article is like, why is a red state like Texas, kicking blue state ass on renewable energy? And they interviewed a fellow by the name of Jesse Jenkins, who's a professor and engineer at Princeton University. And what it boils down to is, one, Texas is the energy capital of America. We generate a lot of energy, and historically that's been oil and gas and continues to be oil and gas. But we're strong in the renewables business, clearly, which is also energy. It's just coming from a different source. He said that we're also more of a can-do state. In other words, there's a lot more regulatory hurdles in, say, a state like California or some other blue states, where Texas has a bias toward building things. And there's good things about that, and there's also bad things about that.
That's right.
I know there's a lot of concern, for example, on solar going up on prairies. Big flat areas, so there certainly is room for a discussion on what's a more appropriate place for solar to go, or what are we losing, asking the questions of what are we losing when solar goes in a particular place or wind goes into a particular place. But because it is a little bit of a Wild West out there once you get outside cities in terms of what you can do with your property, the fact that Texas has control over most of its grid, and so it doesn't have as many federal impediments to bringing renewables online. And that's another one of those there's good points, there's bad points, as
Right.
many of us know personally from the reliability of the grid. But the way Texas does operate the grid, it does favor the lower cost sources of energy, and wind and solar, are the lower cost sources of energy. What's your
My good news? Okay, you know that song, Baby Sharks do 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 do. I have an article about baby sharks at Galveston Bay. It's out of the Houston Chronicle. It says Galveston Bay sees a 600% increase in baby bull sharks as climate change warms the coastal waters. So the good news is that they're more abundant. They've moved, and so the article goes into detail about how they used to really only be found further south, but with the warming waters, they found a nice spot in Galveston Bay, and it's just this kind of shocking explosion, and it's become a shark nursery pretty much. The article does talk about there being some impacts to local fisheries. One fisherman described throwing your line out and then the fish going crazy because they're being chased by a shark, and then suddenly there's no movement because all that's left is the head of the fish because the sharks are just following the fishermen around and the shrimpers around and eating up all the fish. And the downside was that it's sort of a mixed news. So the good news is they've found a sanctuary and their numbers are growing, but their prey species are not doing as well. And so there's actually not resulting in any more overall reproduction, but maybe balancing out a little bit of the pressures of climate change. So I decided to call it good news.
That is an interesting article. That one of the climate books I read made the statement, that in the future there won't be invasive species because all species will be invasive, just in the sense that
right, they're all moving.
They're all moving. Yeah, if they can move, they're moving.
That's right. And that, it's going to be the most resilient and adaptable, quickly adaptable species that survive. So we're going to see a real shift in all of the ecosystems, I think. And just so you're not scared, everyone listening, the sharks are about less than 3 feet long at this stage, and they do move out to the ocean. So, and they're really not interested in us per se.
Okay.
They're not going after us.
Okay.
I learned a lot this month. Robert, how about you?
Yep, I did as well. And I guess maybe one lesson in all of these things is it's good to take a step back and look at the big picture.
Yeah, and I'll just say my takeaway from Dr. Myint is don't wait. It's happening now. Act now. Get out there, plant a tree, and also have a great summer, everyone.
Yeah.
Thank you all for being with us for another climate conversation. We hope you can take this information with you into your everyday life to help spread the knowledge and understanding of climate topics and their effects.
This podcast would certainly not be what it is without listeners like you. If you're listening through Spotify, take a quick moment to help us out and engage with the quiz and poll we've attached to this episode. And be sure to check the show notes for helpful links and resources.
Thank you to our funders for the Fahrenheit 140 podcast, both the Meadows Foundation and the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. We'd also like to thank our communications team, Anna Huff and Sarah Wingfield.
If you'd like to learn more about the Meadows Center for Water and the Environment and how to visit our vital spring lake for a ride in a glass-bottom boat here in San Marcos, Texas, be sure to visit our website, meadowcenter.txst.edu. We have a number of climate resources there, including free lesson plans for your K-12 curricula. Sign up for our newsletters to get news, updates, and event opportunities hot off the press. I'm Robert Mace.
And I'm Carrie Thompson. Thanks for being part of the conversation.